Guys, welcome back, Xupes Watches YouTube channel, and today we're diving into an absolute classic. It is, of course, the Rolex Datejust. We'll have a look at the design, we'll look at the technicalities, but we'll also touch on how it's become this really integral part of watch collecting at large. Let's get into it. So guys, let's dive all the way back to the very beginning. It was, of course, in 1945 we saw the very first Rolex Datejust. It was the 4467 reference. Now, we don't have one here in front of us today, but there are a couple of key features that that original reference had. It didn't have Datejust on the dial, it didn't have a Cyclops option on the date window at 3 o'clock, and it didn't have the Oyster case either, so it was a very different beast. It was almost as if Rolex were experimenting with this new type of wristwatch that then only in the 50s incorporated Datejust on the dial, Oyster case, and this Cyclops and date window at 3 o'clock. The other thing about the updates on the 4467 was that this particular watch from the 1940s to the 1950s was only produced in 18 karat yellow gold. It made it something very much aspirational for the consumer base at the time, and it really was the foundation of the 1600 and the 1601 we have here today. The Datejust was developed by Rolex to mark the 40th anniversary of the brand, and unlike a lot of the launches we see today that commemorate anniversaries, there's not a great deal of innovation, whereas the Datejust was very different. This was, of course, the very first watch that was automatic and had the capacity to change its date at 12 o'clock every single night. So guys, let's talk about the design of the Datejust, because this is one of the icons of watchmaking. It's a word that gets thrown around all too often, but the truth is when you see a Datejust across the room, you know it. Now, there's a couple of different watches on the table here, and what's lovely is that we've actually got references from different periods of time. We've got the smooth bezel in the 1600 here. We have the fluted bezel, which came slightly later, which really does make the watch stand out. We have the Jubilee bracelet. We have the Oyster case. We have the classic proportions, the 36mm case. We have different dial executions. We have a linen dial execution here in the 1600, and the 16013, we've got this flat finish, but all of them have these raised baton markers, time only with date function at 3 o'clock, and really all coming together to make this really versatile, iconic, instantly recognizable timepiece. When I think of the Datejust, I think of a watch that Rolex have really nailed when it comes to versatility, because it can be that depending on wrist size and of course your preference, you can actually have the Datejust in a number of different settings. It can have a fluted bezel or a smooth bezel. It can have a blue dial or a grey dial, or it can have the Jubilee bracelet or an Oyster bracelet. So it is in essence a chameleon. It can be anything to anybody. And I really have to say I love the watch for that. So in classic Rolex style, the evolution of the Datejust has been just that. It's been an evolution. It has not been wholesale change. Even from the 1960s to the present day, these watches look very, very similar. Now, key changes, while minor, are important to note that in the late 80s we saw sapphire crystal become the standard. Here we've got a box perspex, which gave it that vintage touch and feel, but modernized for the present day. We've got updates in the caliber to improve performance. We've got updates in steel. Just to drive that home, you'd have to actually feel the watch to feel that heft, but there is a key difference in steel. And then of course we've got the proportions, which have been updated for modern use. Maybe more than any other reference made by any brand in the world, the Datejust has transversed across worlds over the years, from Wall Street and the city in London, and the connotations that come with a two-tone Datejust, to Only Fools and Horses and the silver screen. We've got stars like Harrison Ford, Jennifer Aniston, and of course historical icons like Martin Luther King wearing a Datejust during the speech, I Have a Dream. It's impossible to not look at this as a significant piece of design over the decades. So I can hear you at home saying, well, why consider a Datejust? And it's a valid point. I think what's interesting about the Datejust is it really does tick all of the boxes. To me, it is the reference from Rolex. It is the one that incorporates all of the key design elements, from the Oyster case to the Jubilee bracelet. And crucially, that functionality that you get from Rolex. You get real value for money, you get rock solid build quality, and you get something that's a design icon that's been around for decades and will be around for decades to come. I see this watch as probably the perfect one watch collection. You know, these days we see a lot of new buyers coming into the industry looking for that one watch that ticks all the boxes, and you'd be hard pressed to find another one other than the Datejust. It is good for all of those settings, and you know that you've got a safe investment. Of course, with Rolex, we have the professional and the classic, the two sides of the coin, the two different parts of the family. Now, the Datejust falls on the classic side, and it is that watch that really does transverse across all different genre. I mean, if you're interested like I am in historical significance for watches, you know, it's historically significant because in the late 1970s, we saw the caliber 30-35 introduced, which allowed this quick set date function to be installed into an automatic watch for the very first time. If you're someone who's driven by aesthetic and design, you will find a lot to love in this because it is incorporative of all of the key design elements from Rolex. Also, if you're someone who's sensitive to price, I mean, who isn't? The Datejust represents steel options as well as two-tone options, whereas the Day-Date, of course, is reserved for precious metals. You may not want that sporty Submariner or that Daytona, but the Datejust gives you that flexibility to be somewhere in the middle, something that ticks all of the boxes for all occasions. The Datejust can be dressed up or dressed down. It can be used and enjoyed in water. It's hugely robust, and my God, does it look the part. Guys, thank you very much for joining me. That is the Datejust for you, looking at the evolution over the years. We're going to have a deeper dive into the 1601 later for the vintage watch lovers out there. As always, do hit subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Please leave a comment and tell me which is your favorite Datejust or what you'd like to see reviewed next. And as always, hit the bell to be made aware of all of the new videos coming out of Xupes. But until next time, go well.